Well, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. I am Catherine Boyle with Key Ministry. And if you follow our work, you know that we've been hosting webinars every Wednesday since about mid-March to address different topics that parents, churches, ministry leaders have, just to address some of the different things that we're all thinking, feeling, wondering about, trying to navigate through as we go through life in the pandemic. And today is no exception. In fact, I think this may be one of the most universal topics that we've addressed during this whole time. And that's back to school in a pandemic. I don't know a single person that has kids that I've either talked to, interacted with online, or been aware of who is not dealing with some amount of anxiety and stress, whether you're a parent in particular, or even for educators and the students, of course, themselves. That this is such a different environment that we're all stepping back into with the traditional back to school events and environment. So I have the great pleasure to introduce to you today Teresa Reynolds. Teresa is with Longwood University in Farmville, Virginia. If you're not familiar, Farmville is a little town about an hour outside of Richmond and about an hour east of Lynchburg, if that kind of orients you to where Longwood is. But it's one of the public universities in Virginia, great school. Gosh, Teresa has done a whole lot of different things. I mean, she's done pretty much anything that you can think about in like a school counselor, social worker, school support kind of function at the K-12 level. But then now she's doing that sort of thing at the university level and also teaching students who want to do the same kind of thing in public and private schools going forward. So Teresa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It is a great pleasure to have been asked to be a part of this. And it is a topic that everybody that I know is talking about.
Yes, yes. I mean,
concerned about it.
Yeah, who isn't feeling some level of anxiety about this and the stress? I mean, like I said, it's a universal kind of thing.
Exactly.
So, well, Teresa and I met, I don't even know, more than 10 years ago, probably. I'm not sure. We have a mutual friend. And so, we got connected to, to have this conversation today. But Teresa, if you don't mind just telling us a little bit about, your background and maybe even your passion about why this became your career.
Absolutely. I would love to. Thank you. So, as Catherine shared, I work currently at Longwood University, and it actually is also my alma mater. I graduated from Longwood. It was college back when I was here as a student, way back in 1996 with my bachelor's in social work. And didn't always think that I wanted to be a social worker. I actually started my freshman year thinking I was going to be a veterinarian, but quickly realized that my passion really was working with people and being able to help individuals through whatever circumstance they may have. And so I found my way to Longwood College at the time and got my degree in social work. And I've been very happy with that decision. And so kind of my experience has been a little bit, as Catherine said, kind of all over the place. I started my career path working in a Department of Social Services, doing child protective services and adult protective services, and loved it. Felt very passionate about working with individuals that have been abused or neglected, but knew I wanted to pursue higher education. And so I went on and achieved my master's degree from Virginia Commonwealth University and became a school social worker. Loved working with children and of course parents as well. And so that's where my passion really was working in the school system. So ever since I graduated up until about 2016, I was in a school division, first in Charlottesville, where the University of Virginia is, and then in Chesterfield County, which is a county near Richmond, Virginia. And so loved working in the schools because there I had such a diverse population, being able to work with kids, parents, teachers, administrators, in a variety of issues dealing with anything from abuse and neglect of children to homelessness to children with mental health issues, as well as like threat assessments, children that may be at risk of suicide. So that's really where the bulk of my career has been, is in the school system, K through 12. As you can see, I also obtained my license, and so I'm a licensed clinical social worker. And while I was working in the schools, I also had a private practice on the side. And during that, I worked a lot with children and adults with anxiety disorders or other mental health issues, marriage, counseling, things of that nature. And so it's hard to be a social worker and not work with individuals dealing with anxiety. And
Right.
so that really has been something that I've dealt with since I graduated from undergraduate, because it's just such a pronounced and common concern in the world in which we live today.
Right.
And I've been here at Longwood ever since 2016, working with the social work program, trying to prepare other individuals to kind of go out and do service for others.
Right. Well, that's awesome. I just, it's incredible to me, all the things that you've gotten to do, and really just the breadth of experience you have, seeing what students go through in ordinary times, but obviously we're not really living in ordinary times right now. Before we continue on, I just want to throw out that if you have joined us on the webinar, if you registered, feel free to send questions to Teresa in the chat. We will work those in as we're able to in the conversation. Or if you're watching our live stream on Facebook, feel free to add a comment there. And again, we will work to add those kind of questions and comments into our conversation today with Teresa. So you just mentioned, Teresa, that you have seen a lot of anxiety in students over the years. And there's a good kind of anxiety where we're excited, we're looking forward to things. And I think that certainly there's some of that this year. There may not be as much, just because it is so different, and so many students are maybe going to school in an online environment where that is not normally the case. Right. But what are your thoughts on just kind of normal back to school anxiety versus what we're facing today?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, anxiety is we should normalize anxiety. That's just a part of everyday life. I had anxiety before coming to this webinar. We have anxiety before going to a new job or even going to the doctor's office. Anxiety is any type of apprehension or fear of a situation. And we all experience that. Going to a party where we're going to be meeting people for the first time. So I think it's important for everyone to understand that we shouldn't try and get rid of anxiety. There's a part of anxiety that is good for us because it helps us to try and be on our top game and to perform well. And we need to be concerned about anxiety is what it is impacting our daily functioning. And so what we're seeing in the K through 12 setting or college setting is that we're seeing more and more students have those types of fears and worries about school. And though going back to school in 2020 is looking a little different, it's still causing anxiety for so many students because there's a lot of students that need that personal connection,
Right.
that face-to-face engagement to learn best. And so even though they may be doing it online and getting to stay at home, they're anxious about that because how am I going to get my questions answered? Or am I going to be able to have someone really sit down next to me and work me through something when I'm having a problem? Or I'm not going to get to see my friends. I'm not going to get to engage and interact with my peers, or things that a lot of students are dealing with. I'm not going to get to play my recreational sport because those things have been postponed or changed. And so there's anxiety around that. So there's just so many compounded issues I think that students are facing today and parents are facing. Right. And so, but I do want to make sure that everybody knows, we shouldn't automatically stress out because we're seeing anxiety in our kids. It's only when it's impacting their daily functioning or their sleep patterns and things like that we then need to start being concerned.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, so what are some things that you are seeing, or that you are suggesting? I know you've got other slides in this presentation, but you know, there we go. I was really curious about what you were going to say about, you know, what are some of these impacts that we're seeing, because it can be really hard for individuals or parents to gauge, okay, is this anxiety a healthy thing for me, or has it become too much? And so, you know, it looks like you've got some things here that will help kind of delineate when has it become too much, when you should really be seeking help.
Right. So anxiety looks different for every person, you know. Somebody may be experiencing anxiety and they're not showing any outwardly symptoms of that anxiety, because it can impact us in our body, in our mind, our emotions, but it can also impact our behaviors. And so sometimes with children, you may see those outwardly behaviors that are easy to identify, but you may not necessarily identify some of those things that aren't quite so obvious.
Right.
And so why I wanted to bring these things up is that, you know, children, if they're starting to experience more health issues, more headaches, you know, muscle aches, or just tired, those types of things, it could be, it not necessarily is, you know, connected to anxiety, but it could be. And so it's just a red flag for us to think about and to watch and to ask questions to our children when we're starting to see increases or changes in their body and their health.
And I would just throw out here too that particularly for younger children, anxiety, you know, doesn't look the same necessarily that it does in adults. And in fact, you know, frequent stomach aches or migraine of the stomach can be an anxiety type response that you see in younger children.
Bowel issues, you know, those types of running to the bathroom, having upset stomachs. You know, some children will throw up more, you know, because that impacts them. So, you know, you definitely want to just be aware of that. And one that I want to identify here is breathlessness. And that's not one that necessarily everybody picks up on. But I know for me, if I get nervous or anxious about something that's coming up, I don't breathe the same. Mm-hmm. Holding your breath, you're kind of holding all that tension and anxiety and worry inside. And so your breathing patterns are a little bit different, which is some of the reasons why you then end up having the physical symptoms in your body, headaches, things of that nature, because you're not getting the oxygen to your brain that you need. So just paying attention to those things is important. If your child is complaining about bad dreams or having difficulty sleeping at night, things like that, you know, start asking questions. Certainly, you know, monitor what they may be watching on TV, but also just ask, you know, well, what were you thinking about? Or can you remember what your dream is about? Just to kind of figure out what might be going on. But making poor decisions, sometimes that's how children exhibit anxiety.
Right.
Certainly emotions, if they're fussier, if they're not quite as compliant as maybe they once were, seeming a little sad, not wanting to play or do the things that they normally do, hesitation in doing things. You know, we know that a lot of children want to go back to school, and so they're anxious, but at the same time, if they're able to go to an event or something, sometimes there might be a little apprehension of, am I going to get sick if I go to this event? How is it going to impact me? Or, you know, say they have, I know for my children, they stay a lot with my parents who are older and have some health issues. And so my 10-year-old daughter said to me yesterday, was it going to be safe for me to go to school and then go to my grandparents' house? You know, and I'm going to be exposing them now to whatever I was exposed to. So just little things like that. You know, we need to make sure we're having conversations and talking through those issues with our children so that they're not perseverating on those anxieties or worries.
Right. Well, and I would just also mention here that Teresa and I talked before today about, you know, what we were going to be discussing, and particularly for older students who may be going off to college for the first time or returning to college, you know, change in behaviors that like increased drinking or increased smoking, or a sudden change, you know, where they weren't drinking or smoking before, but now they are, you know, that can be a normal part of what students choose to do, but it can also be a coping mechanism for dealing with anxiety. So it's just something to try to be aware of as best you can with your students, you know, or with educators in the university setting.
I think we as educators, you know, those of us that may be working in the college or individuals, teachers that are K through 12, I think, you know, one thing that we need to do for our children and our students is making sure that we're making ourselves more available. So if your teachers or your student is doing virtual learning and having to learn online, how can the teachers make themselves more available to their students so that their students can rest assured that they're going to get their questions answered or that their needs are going to be met? So I think at this point, we've all become experts with Zoom. So unfortunately, teachers have, you know, that resource. You know, I'm just thankful that we have it. I know many of us are tired of Zoom at this point, but I'm really thankful that we have it because of, you know, we are still in a pandemic and we still need to be able to reach out and communicate and see the people with whom we're working. And so teachers making themselves more available for that. FaceTime, everybody has a smartphone. You know, if Zoom's not going to work, can I call you? Can I talk to you? Can I text you? I know in college, a lot of professors are actually, in admissions, our admissions department is actually using text messaging a lot more than email because so many students are connecting to texting. And so we actually have apps where we're texting our students to, you know, about returning to school or doing your deposit or this, that, and the other, because that's the mechanism that works for this generation of children. And so, you know, I know some people have objections maybe to their personal cell phone number going out, but, you know, at the secondary, at the graduate or the college level, I really have never found that students abuse the use of my cell phone. It's all my business cards, so every student has it if they need to access me. And typically the only rule I tell them is don't text me after 9 p.m. I'm you after 9 o'clock at night. I'm old, I'm gonna go to bed.
Right.
So, but they seem to respect it. That's just their modality of communication. And so I think it's important for educators and teachers to just make sure that they stay in contact with the students to be able to answer questions and have more frequent check-ins. You know, if we are doing things virtually, you know, make it a routine at every Monday at 8 a.m. You're sending an email to your students. Hey, do you have any questions? Do you need anything? Just so that they know you're there.
Right. And I think that, you know, there's probably lots of those kinds of things that have been done in corporate and ministry and in other realms of education, but to also make sure that you're including the students in that, I think can be incredibly helpful in just, you know, establishing kind of a new set of, you know, here's the structure, because we all feel a little bit, you know, more okay with what's going on when we have, you know, kind of a structure for how we're going to move forward with back to school, with our work, whatever it is that we're involved in. So,
absolutely.
So just want to throw out here again, if you are on the webinar or if you are watching on Facebook Live, feel free to send questions to Teresa. We would love to hear your thoughts on, you know, what your concerns are for your students, either as a parent or as an educator, or if you're a student who's going back to school and you have some stresses and anxieties, or maybe you get questions and you know, what's being done to help students, please feel free to send those questions either through the chat on the webinar or in our Facebook comments. So yeah, everybody's feeling the stress.
So I just wanted to include some, you know, to normalize what we're all going through, alone. And so I just wanted to share some recent statistics on how people are feeling. You know, almost half of America are anxious about contracting COVID-19. And so we're not alone in the thoughts and feelings that we're having. And so, and then it's not just about the here and now, it's about the long term. What is the impact? And so, you know, almost 70% of Americans feel that this is going to have a long-lasting impact on our economy. And so when we're
Right.
just dealing with back to school, we're also dealing with the stresses of financial concerns and how this is impacting. I know at the university level, that's on every university's mind, because having students on campus is really the life source of the institution's finances. That not having students on campus dramatically impacts the revenue that the university has. So and when we think about families, you know, people who are out of work or people who are losing jobs because companies are going under, some of teenagers, college students are having to work more jobs to help their families.
Right.
So
Right.
it's not just the anxiety and pressures of back to school, there's also that whole stressor of my family's not doing well financially. And so how am I going to help, or how is that going to impact me?
Right. So we got a question in the chat. And it's one of these things that, you know, it's a difficult thing. There's no easy answers for a lot of what families are having to deal with educating their kids. But, you know, this parent is very concerned about, you know, having to work and then help her kids that are in pretty different grade levels. You know, particularly with younger children, it can be very difficult to, you know, they're just not self-sufficient.
Right.
And, you know, they need a lot of hands-on help that normally is there in a traditional classroom setting. And then if you throw special needs into that, which a lot of our audience, you know, is comprised of parents of children with special needs, you know, that just adds a lot more complexity. So, so are you hearing about, I guess, specific supports or encouragement or even tools for parents who are really kind of caught in this conundrum of, I have to work, you know, I have to provide, you know, for our family, but, you know, I need help getting the education resources too.
Absolutely. And I think every county is doing things a little bit differently. And so it is, you know, important to certainly reach out to your local division and find out what supports they are having. And so I know locally, a lot of public schools are making sure that Chromebooks or tablets are provided to every student that needs it. You know, I live in rural areas, and so some of the complication for families is that they don't have internet access. And so some local schools are providing hotspots to those families to make sure that they have the ability to access the internet. So if any of those are, you know, areas that are concerned, certainly reach out to your division and let them know specifically what you need, and they should be able to access some resources to make it possible for you to do that. In terms of the educational support, you know, for young students, last year, when all of this took place and started, I had a kindergartner. And so I know exactly what you mean about working full time, because I still had to work for Longwood, and yet I had two children at home that were basically having to be homeschooled by me at the same time that I'm having to still work. And so it was quite the challenge. And so my recommendations is setting aside a certain amount of time each day that you can dedicate to answering their questions, trying to organize their lessons so that what is independent work that maybe you can have them do first, and then maybe when you're done working, okay, these are the things that I can, you know, set aside some time to help you with. Or communicating again with the teachers, letting them know I'm working full time, you know, is there any support? Is there a time that you could communicate or Zoom with my student, my child, to answer some of these questions? So I know that divisions are working really hard to make it possible. They're setting aside, you know, for some school divisions that are having some hybrid models and virtual, they're setting aside virtual teachers to answer all of those questions, to be a resource. If you do have a student that has special needs and has an IEP, those case managers are setting aside time, and they're even in some divisions making it possible for you to come to the school to have one-on-one time. It just depends on the division and what accommodations they can make. But Locally, I know that they have an extra day set aside for students. Most students get 2 days a week of in-person and 2 days of distance learning or virtual learning. But then there's that fifth day during the week that they're setting aside for students that need the extra assistance. So don't hesitate. Don't be afraid to ask questions to your division about what specifically you need and how they can provide that for you.
Yeah, those are great ideas, particularly, basically dividing the work that your children have into, what they need hands-on help with and what they can take care of on their own. Today, we actually ran an article that we had posted on our blog a couple of years ago about some tips for parents who do have children with special needs to make sure that the teachers understand what is really important in those IEPs. And in the article, I would just really encourage you to go read it. And honestly, I don't remember which Facebook page it's on, but it's either the Key Ministry Facebook page or our Not Alone Parents Facebook page. But it talks about sending your child's teacher a summary email of the IEP with like the 3 or 4 most important things that the teacher needs to understand about how your child learns best. And that can really help teachers get a handle on it much more quickly and be able to provide help for your student appropriately. And one of the points in the article was that many schools are very large and have huge student populations. That's not necessarily quite the same at the elementary level, but just establishing that kind of communication early on with your teacher, particularly where there are special needs, can really pay big dividends.
Yeah, and I would add to that
into the future.
Right, I would add to that even goes for college students. So we tell our college students, notify your professor if you have you need certain accommodations. Now, every university has Office of Disability Services.
Right.
And students have to register with the Office of Disability to get, their accommodations to provide to their professors. But I tell students, the ones that I advise, don't just give them the accommodations list and walk away. Schedule a time to sit down with your professor and talk with them one-on-one about how you learn best, what you may need, and answer any questions. And for those students, I think they should definitely take advantage of their professor's office hours. Every professor is required to have 4 office hours a week. And that means they're in their physical office space and anybody can drop by. And so I tell my students, make sure you're taking advantage of that, because that shows, one, that you are motivated, that you have an interest in doing well academically, and they're going to be able to answer your questions. And taking advantage of that and just making it a personal note to reach out to your professors or your teachers to let them know what areas you need support in.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably been somewhat of a shift in the way that professors view their relationship with students, even in the larger university setting where, like you indicated that even the admissions office is now, sharing numbers to be able to text with students. And that's obviously quite a change. Well, thank you for having this slide, because I think this is one thing that a lot of parents are really concerned about, and maybe more so than students. Certainly older students are thinking about this, I would assume. But yeah, I mean, nobody wants their child to get behind on their work. And it's been really interesting to see kind of the shift from when schools first went completely virtual through the end of the school year. A lot of parents, it just seemed kind of gave up, that it was just so hard to balance all the different things. And so there is quite a concern about, how are these gaps going to be addressed? So what are some things that particularly from an educator perspective, what are some things that you are hearing other educators talk about, or things that you are even putting in place, or that you see in other school systems that are being put in place to try to help make sure that there aren't delays or gaps in the education that students are getting?
So first I'd like to touch on the K-12 perspective, and then I can talk about from the college perspective. But from the K-12 perspective, I think it's important that we realize that everybody is probably going to have some gaps, and there's going to be some disparities in our educational curriculum. And so, you know, when we think about kids moving from one grade to the next and being behind, what's going to have to happen educationally is a reconfiguration of what that curriculum looks like. And they're going to have to start off where the students are. And so that's kind of a catchphrase that we have in social work is you meet your client where the client is. That's what they're going to have to do in the school system. And they're going to have to meet the kids where they are. And so your child is not going to be alone in being slightly behind. The rest of the class is probably going to be in the same place. As an educator, and as a previous school social worker, my biggest concern is for those students with fewer resources than other students. And we know that that's going to happen, that there are going to be those individuals whose parents may not have a degree, who aren't able to help them academically with their schoolwork, who may not have the extra resources to be able to supplement curriculum. So those are the students I think that I'm the most concerned about. And from an educator's standpoint, the school division is going to have to meet that child where they are.
Right.
And they're going to have to adapt the curriculum to meet their needs. And so maybe our SOLs that we have here in the state of Virginia, standards of learning, might have to be reconfigured a little bit because what we thought students were going to to cover in third grade, they may not actually get to cover in third grade. It might have to be something that's moved to fourth grade. So schools are going to have to do some modifications to kind of where they are. And I think we just need to kind of relax a little bit and realize that our students aren't going to fail because they missed some education because of virtual learning or distance learning or whatever. Educators are wanting children to be successful, and so they're going to have to differentiate their instruction to be able to meet every student's needs. And I think, again, that's just the modifications that are going to have to be made. I think the biggest thing that we look at for students that's a little bit harder to maybe operationalize and manage is the emotional difficulties that some of our students are going to face. And so I think I have seen over the last couple of years improvement, at least in the state of Virginia, in recognizing the need for mental health support in the school systems. I'm seeing more counselors being hired, more psychologists being hired, more school social workers being hired to support that. And I think that given what the results of the pandemic, some of those long-term effects are going to be, we're going to see increased mental health needs in our schools, and we're going to get more support for that. And so my hope is that the funding will be there to provide that support for our students and for faculty, because it's stressful to be able to deal with what all they're having to do. I know I hear the stress and the buzz at the college level of what we're doing, trying to prepare for classes beginning August 24th. And K through 12 divisions are having to do that same thing. And it's new for all of us, having to adapt and learn on the job. It's on the job training.
Right. Well, and looking at this from the parent perspective, I think it's, I've heard a lot of parents are choosing to homeschool, which is certainly understandable. And there are so many resources available to do that. It is definitely not a path that you have to create yourself. And I would, to your point here under the parent perspective, I would encourage parents, even who are not homeschooling, to look into the homeschooling, the primary homeschooling organization in your state, to find out what kinds of social extracurricular kinds of things are already in place. Because they are significant. They have sports leagues. There is a huge amount of extracurricular social kinds of things that are available to parents. I mean, even if your children aren't being homeschooled. So, don't think that there's absolutely nothing out there for your child.
Absolutely. And there's different support groups that can be had, just like this one for Key Ministries online. There's those types of things. My advisement would be obviously for parents to just monitor what types of online supports they might be receiving, different groups and things like that. I know here at Longwood, one of the things that we're trying to initiate this fall is a learning group for incoming freshmen and transfer students. And so it might end up being a virtual support system.
Right.
But certainly at the K through 12 level, I think that needs parental discretion and supervision to make, that's the word I was looking for, supervision, to make sure that they're just in a safe environment. But there are so many extracurricular activities that students can take part in, and just find those opportunities for socialization to meet those needs.
Right.
In terms of academic issues, there's so much to reading. And if you just took 15, 20 minutes every evening to read as a family, to read a devotional, or to read a short story and a book together, and, read one chapter a night. I know for me, there's oftentimes that the evenings are just so packed and busy, it's hard. But if you make it a part of your daily routine,
Right.
15, 20 minutes, that has a significant impact on your child's learning. And so during this time, that's just one simple thing. And it doesn't have to be at night. It can be in the morning. It can be, if you're at home with your child midday at lunchtime when you're reading together while you're eating.
Right.
You can find the time, and that will have positive impacts on your child's learning.
Right. Well, I just want to remind everybody, we are taking questions, so feel free to submit those in the chat, or if you have a question and you're watching the Facebook live stream, please just leave a comment, and we'll work those in as we're able. So we did touch on special education, what the schools are doing, so we won't spend a ton of time on this, but is there anything else that you'd like to share, that's bulleted here that, maybe we didn't already talk about?
Yeah, I went ahead, and since we talked a lot about that slide already, I went ahead and just moved to some of the resources that you can find online for special education related to COVID. Many of you may already have accessed some of these, but they have wonderful articles, resources, learning opportunities to be able to use. And so these are just some that I would definitely recommend that would be helpful during the time.
Okay. Excellent. So
the next slide I had was, we did already actually talk a lot about some of this in just terms of things to look for in your kids, right, to check out. But in terms of when to seek intervention, realistic in what you're anticipating. And I think first and foremost, our children take signs from us.
Right.
So if we perseverate and we have 24/7 news on, where all it's doing is talking about the negativity and the number of cases, or how many new deaths there were, those types of things, and we are talking a lot about that, our children, even if they're playing in the background, they're hearing it. And so we need to first take a look at ourselves and what we're doing, because our children are learning from our behaviors.
Right.
So the less stressed you are about what's going on, the less stress and anxiety and worry you'll see in your children.
Yeah, and I don't know that it needs to be said, but I mean, it's definitely a balance, because you don't want your children to be uninformed about what is going on with you, or with the world that they experience, but at the same time, it does not develop resilience in them if they are faced 24/7 with only negative information, that if you step outside your house you're going to die. So and honestly, it seems to me that it's very healthy to lay the phone down for a while during the day, particularly if you have young children, just so that they don't assume that that's just the normal way of life, because they are learning from all of us, and it just communicates to them that they matter. And that goes a long way towards helping children feel safe and secure and less anxious.
Absolutely. And so just, glance over the symptoms that are on your screen currently. There's, cognitive, behavioral, and physical symptoms. And again, I just want to reiterate, children are not always going to tell you that they're anxious. And so we as parents, as educators, as teachers, need to be observant, and we need to just monitor our children's behaviors and keep an eye out, and those little red flags that might be going on to identify, what might be happening. Because as we know, anxiety can lead to depression. Excessive anxiety can lead to depression. And,
Right.
and if we catch it in time, it's very treatable. It's very manageable, but we need to catch it before it becomes a pattern. Because as we know, we are people of habits and patterns. And so if a child gets in a pattern or a habit of constantly worrying and being anxious or perseverating on something, it's harder to break a habit. If something occurs once or twice, it's much easier to intervene and to handle it then before it becomes a negative behavior and something that we want to try and reduce. So,
Question for you real quick. So if you're a teacher, can we go back to the previous slide?
We can.
If you're a teacher and you see these things in a child, so what are some suggestions that you would recommend for teachers who may want to communicate with a parent if they're seeing these kinds of things, either in person with a child or in online interaction with a child?
So first and foremost, documentation is important. And so I would always document what changes or what behaviors you've noticed. And then when you see that there's a concern, then you have that information to bring to the parent and say, last week on 3 different occasions, I noticed that Sarah was withdrawing from conversation or was avoidant to complete a task. And then she did the same thing about twice this week. And I just wanted to talk to you about if there's been any concerns going on at home, or if you've noticed any significant worry or problems in the home setting. So if you can document what you've seen versus just randomly saying, hey, I think she's anxious, what's going on? But giving parents very specific, tangible examples of what you're noticing so that they can also go, last week she did the same thing. And she was, hesitant to go into her church class or her, extracurricular activity. She was hesitant, and usually she's so excited about going. Then it can bring the parents to more awareness sometimes when other people are seeing. Sometimes we just blow things off of, oh, that was no big deal. She's just in a bad mood, or she's just tired, or whatever. But if someone else brings it to your attention and says on 2 or 3 different occasions, or on 5 situations this happened, then the parent knows, hey, this is something we need to bring more awareness to and talk to the child about it. And so when we see that, the first thing to always do is engage in conversation and talk to the child about what they may be feeling and what's going on. And do you, kids may not always have the answers. But then, making sure when we see these things that we are then removing whatever stressors from that child's life that we possibly can, or reducing. So maybe we realize, hey, I've had some really rough days, and I've been complaining a lot when I'm at home, and maybe I need to be more aware of the fact that my child's in the room and I need to not do that. Or turning the news channels off, or not talking about, job problems, whatever might be going on in your life, you then become more aware of what you need to do, and that you're focusing on the child and you're focusing on those positive coping mechanisms to help them learn how to deal with what stressor might be going on. We need to equip our children with those self-care coping strategies. I know for me, when I was in the K through 12 schools, that was one of the biggest things that I saw that children lacked, was coping mechanisms. Mm-hmm. And when you see signs of anxiety, that's the first thing you need to do, is teach the children or teach adults. Sometimes we have to teach adults too, how to cope with what's going on and manage. You know,
Right.
we in a society where we are so used to getting everything at the snap of a finger, at the click of a button, and you can't fix anxiety like that. You can't
Right.
fix stress like that. And so you have to be able to deal with it on an ongoing basis. And so we have to teach those coping and self-care strategies.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And, you know, one thing that I remember reading when my children were young was, you know, we can't fix everything in life. But as you mentioned, basically you were saying we're parents in part to teach our kids to be resilient or to help them develop resilience. And I remember reading that, you know, when there's a situation that your child is dealing with, it's good to let them talk about it and then ask them how they want to handle it. And oftentimes they'll come up with their own solution. And that gives them a real sense of accomplishment and that this is not so big and terrible that it's completely unmanageable. So, you know, that I didn't think that up. That came from a child care expert, but I just thought that was really a helpful thing to encourage your child to think and help them come up with their own solution. So
I want to add on to that because I often listen to podcasts or books on tape and things like that in my travels. And I want to say it was Brene Brown, but I can't recall specifically. But one of the things that she said that was impactful on her in growing up is that her father, when they would sit at the dinner table every night, or at least once a week, would say, "What did you fail at this week?" And she just used to think, fail, like why do I want to talk about a failure?
Right.
But then she realized that her father's perception and view on failure was a good thing, and that if you haven't failed at something this week, then you didn't challenge yourself. You didn't work hard at something. And I think sadly in today's world and in this generation, things come so easily to our children and we so desperately want to protect them from failures.
Right.
That they don't ever learn how to work through a struggle.
Right.
And I think we need to allow our children to sometimes make mistakes and to sometimes fail at things and then help them learn how to work through that.
Right.
Because through that challenge, through that struggle, you're going to be a stronger individual. It's just, think of the analogy of a butterfly coming out of a cocoon.
Right.
If we opened that cocoon for them, that butterfly would never be able to fly because it hadn't developed its muscles. And I think it's the exact same thing for our children. They have to learn how to work through situations and problems so that they become resilient and they become a stronger individual and they have those coping mechanisms to deal with problems when they occur.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, so I just want to throw out here, we're coming up on the top of the hour. It's been a quick conversation, but we've got about 10 more minutes. So be sure if you have a question to go ahead and submit it in the chat or in the Facebook comments on the live stream. So just got a few more slides and a few more minutes with Teresa, but so what are some things that you think are really important for people to be focusing on, you know, parents, educators, students in this time to try to minimize and mitigate that anxiety that we're all feeling?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, you know, on here I listed some things that I do that I have found that has helpful for me, but it's important that we all kind of create our own list, and my next slide is kind of one of those examples. But I choose to start every single day with prayer and with Bible study, because I think that that is so important in just setting your tone and your mind for the day. Right. And I think especially when we're dealing with a pandemic and the stressors of life, if we don't have God on our side, we're probably going to be going down some bad paths. You're not going to have the strength and the energy to sustain it. And so that's a great way just to start your day. Certainly, as we kind of briefed earlier, take breaks from social media. Put the cell phone down, turn the TV off. Don't watch 24-hour news coverage. It's depressing, and it's it's not good for our mental health. And so turn it off. take time for yourself. You know, it's not selfish to do things for yourself. We need to make sure we're getting enough sleep. We need to make sure we're eating well and we're eating healthy. You know, when we get busy, we're Americans and we tend to run through that drive-through and we get something that's loaded with fat or grease, and that's not good for our bodies. And so taking 5 or 10 extra minutes in the morning to pack a healthy lunch so that you don't have to do those things. You'd be amazed at how your body feels if you're not putting that stuff in your body all the time.
Right.
For me, one of my biggest stress reliefs is walking. I live in the country. I love to get outside in the fresh air, take a walk with my dogs, with my kids or whomever. And that time to just, and I don't take my cell phone with me, so I don't get any beeps or, notifications that something's coming through, so that I can just truly focus on myself and just enjoying the fresh air for a little while. Making special memories, do things with your family. I know we're all pent up, we're tired of being in the home. But a friend of mine, we all, or a lot of us have Facebook. A friend of mine on Facebook has done something so amazing with her daughter. Every week they pretend that they're traveling to a different country. And so they make, she has her daughter draw the flag of that country. They fix meals that country would have, and then they learn about that country. And it's just something that they do together for dinner time every night. And I just thought that is such an awesome, creative idea, because we're not getting to go places. We're not getting to do as many fun things as we used to. And so why not be creative and bring the fun to us? And so, be creative with what you can do and create those family memories together.
Right.
And so one thing about COVID, I think that is a positive, it's bringing people closer together, at least families, because we're not able to go out and do things. And I think that's important. And then
one thing I want to throw out here,
sure.
in one of our other webinar series, we've talked about, there's lots of online gaming platforms right now that have free games that are family friendly kinds of games. And so if you can't go visit your elderly relatives, well, what a great way to, have some fun, but to, play that online game and do a Zoom at the same time so that you can see each other.
Yeah. I have another family or another friend of mine that every Sunday at a certain time, it's their family Zoom time. And they just all get together on Zoom and they're talking and they're chatting. They might be eating dinner or fixing dinner together. And so even though we might not be physically with them in person, we can be with Zoom or different, modalities. And so we are fortunate that we have the technology to be able to do that. But, we've talked about this earlier. It's just, you've got to maintain as much normalcy as possible. Try, especially with kids maybe not going to school. I still make my kids get up at a certain time. They're not going to sleep the day away. They're still going to go to bed at a certain time. And so maintaining normalcy for our kids is important. And so I think we need to do that. And then the last one I put on here is, don't go beyond what the Center of Disease Control recommends. Excessive hand washing, really going up overboard and making sure things are clean. Stick to the guidelines, because if we go overboard, then we're having a tendency to obsess about what's going on. Our kids pick up on that and they start obsessing about that. And so just maintain good personal hygiene and do the best that you can. And then the rest we need to trust that the Lord is looking out for us, and praying every day, and doing things to the best of your ability. We are in the world that we're in, and sometimes bad things happen to good people, but we can't perseverate on that. And we have to just sit back and know that in everything that happens in life, there's a purpose behind it, and God has a plan. And so we just need to make sure that we're trusting in that plan.
One of the things that one of the writers on our writing team says is that, the special needs life can be thought of as kind of the plan B life. That's nobody's plan A. But God has a great purpose in that plan B life. And sometimes it takes a long time to be able to see that. And it's often very difficult, but Yeah. So, I mean, he is absolutely with each of us in this struggle that we're all facing right now. Now, I know you've got some good self-care strategies on the next slide, because I saw this before our presentation, and I like the one that is cuddle cats, because I'm a cat person, and I know lots of people are on this call are probably dog people, and
Yes.
don't jump on me. But my cat actually made an appearance in one of our webinars a couple months ago, quite unexpectedly for everyone, including me. No, these are great tips, and it may be impossible to go, if you are so blessed to be able to just take a vacation to wherever you want to travel. It may be really difficult to do that right now, to call that self-care, or it may be really difficult to go get your haircut. I haven't had a haircut since January, so but you can do these things at home. So I thought this was a really great list.
And I actually recommend making your list. Get your children to make a list, because sometimes in the moment when we're stressed out, we can't think of something to do. But if you've already thought through and you put up a list, and then, when you notice your kid is maybe a little bit irritable or grumpy or a little stressed out or something, you can say, you know what, I want you to go do one of your self-care items. And then they can go look at the list, and then they can pick it. And that gives them the free will and the choice, control, which is important when you're anxious, is having control over something. And then have them do that activity, or do it with them to help them relax. As a parent, if my kid put down cleaning, I'd be ecstatic.
Right.
For me, it actually is very therapeutic. I love to clean and organize. And when I get stressed out, I'm probably going to go clean something.
Right. Well, and actually that's one of my stress relievers too, but sadly I have just had to learn to get over that one while we've had adult students in home for 6 months.
Right. But encourage your children to make a list, because I think then it brings to the forefront of their mind things that they need to do for them to relax. And it teaches that coping strategy of, this is something that I need to do. And remember, creating a habit is something that you have to do over and over. Right. And so as the parent, when you see your child struggling, or maybe your kids are fighting a little bit, reminding them, you know what, it's self-care time. I want you to go take your list out. I want you to find something to do for a self-care for 15, 20 minutes, and then we can all come back together. Not a negative, punitive, hey, you're fighting, you're going to go sit in timeout, or, you've got to go do X, Y, and Z, but it's a, hey, you're starting to get irritated. And so now it's time to step back, do something that's going to cause you to regroup and refocus and relax you. And so you're teaching a really good positive strategy.
Well, and I know that you have a last slide here that's a really great one, and because we are at the top of the hour, and I just think this is a great way for us to end, is just focusing on scripture. So this is a great one for now, and I appreciate you sharing that with us. Is this a favorite for you, or?
I love this scripture. It's not my favorite scripture. My favorite scripture is actually Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And that's something that I frequently fall to when I'm feeling stressed out or overwhelmed, and just reminding myself that God is with me, and I have the ability to get through this struggle, because he's promised me that he's going to help me through this struggle.
Right. Not remove the struggle, but get you through.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Teresa, thank you so much for your time today. This has just been, I think, super helpful, no matter how you're entering back to school, if you're an educator, a parent, or a student. And just a reminder to everybody who's with us, we do record these. So if you jumped in early, or jumped in late, rather, we'll have the whole recording up on our website later today. And also on the YouTube and Vimeo channels for Key Ministry. If you want to keep up with all of these webinars, the best way to do that really is to subscribe to either our Vimeo or YouTube channels, or sign up to get the Key Ministry emails, because you'll get notifications about what's coming up next. So thank you again, Teresa, so much for a super helpful presentation today. And
Thank
be
you for
sure
having me.
to check back in here with Key Ministry, because we have Wednesday webinars continuing next week and beyond. And go check out our events page at keyministry.org/events to see what we have coming up next. So for today, I'm Catherine Boyle. I'm with Key Ministry, and we just thank you so much for joining us today. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.